This is Let's Talk Tribe, the official Let's Go Tribe podcast, episode 87, recorded on February 12th, 2018. I am your host, Matt Lyons, and on this week's episode, we'll be talking about the idea of trading Edwin Encarnacion, Yu Darvish's contract with the Cubs, and the fact that pitchers and catchers report in, it's just days at this point, we're under a week. And of course, we'll be taking your questions. Before we get into all that, I want to thank everybody listening live now on Facebook or wherever or whenever you may be tuning in. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And consider leaving us a review, comment, something, just let us know you're listening. And joining me for all that and more is none other than Mr. Jason Lukart. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I have realized, I've kind of been aware of this for a while. I'm really desperate for actual baseball, not even spring training, because that's like not even actual baseball to me. This has been like my least favorite off season ever. And I'm desperate for it to come to an end and have actual baseball. So part of me is really excited pitchers and catchers are reporting, but realistically, I'm really excited for like 6 weeks from today.
I'm always excited for the beginning of spring training. The first couple games are exciting, and then maybe one or two that are broadcast I'll watch, but it's very quickly it goes from, hooray, there's baseball, to this isn't really baseball every single year. Even a year like this where it's been so slow, which, I mean, the Indians are never usually that exciting in the offseason, but there's just nothing else to follow in baseball, which kind of sucks. And then I did, one thing I was going to do today was go through and like watch all the condensed games. That was my idea to kind of tie myself over for baseball, but apparently MLB TV doesn't have them. They're not available or something, but so I can't do that. So I'm basically screwed until baseball starts. Could be taught to like one or two fake games in March and then just wait until April, basically.
Do you watch the Olympics at all?
Not really. I try to like curling. It's kind of neat, but the only thing I used to watch in the Winter Olympics is hockey, but I don't really care about that when it's not the NHL players. So what about you?
I've watched a little bit. I mean, I used to, like when I was younger, watch them a ton. And then I feel like the last couple, I've barely watched any. I've watched a little bit more this time. But yeah, I can never get totally into it. I can never flip the switch entirely. Sport that I don't care about it all for 3 years and 11 and a half months, and then convince myself I really care for 2 weeks.
I'll tell you the real thing, the real sport, I'm going to call it a sport, to watch on TV right now is the Westminster Dog Show. I just realized today it started today, and I'm a little upset that it started on the podcast day. But I recorded now to watch the whatever happened today.
Yeah, it's kind of short, so you can get back to that. I'll understand, you know.
This is a really short episode, 10 minutes tops, and we're out. But so some stuff did kind of happen with the Indians. Not even happened, but rumored to maybe almost sort of could have been happened. The Indians were apparently shopping Edwin Encarnacion, or the Red Sox asked about him and refused a player. The weird thing about this, if anybody saw on Let's Go Tribe, we talked about it early this week, is that in the middle of just kind of an article about the free agents not signing anywhere, there was a part about JD Martinez, how frustrated he was with the Red Sox reportedly. And then just sort of right below that was a nice little, from an anonymous source familiar with the matter kind of thing, is that the Red Sox sent, who was it, like, I think Bob Nightingale was the one who said it, that the Indians, they apparently were in talks with the Red Sox about trading Edwin Encarnacion, and the Red Sox just didn't want to give up Jackie Bradley Jr. That whole thing is a rumor in itself, but before getting into the actual rumor, I thought it was interesting the fact that when that came out, the fact that it came out at all, and just how much it seems like there was just some Red Sox executive who said, we want to get some leverage over JD Martinez. So we're going to go to Bob Nightingale, tell him that we talked to the Indians about Edwin Encarnacion, and just see if that helps us at all. Which in a way is kind of throwing the Indians under a bus, because it looks like they're trying to shop Edwin, even if they're not. If the Indians went to them or the Red Sox went to the Indians, just the way it was in the post makes it seem like the Red Sox were asking about Encarnacion, and they just did not want to give up their good guy, Jackie Bradley Jr. So they come out looking like the good guy no matter what, but they also have a leverage over JD Martinez all of a sudden. So that whole thing was weird. What do you think about just the idea of trading Edwin Encarnacion? Is there any reason the Indians could, or any reason they would?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, if they can make the team better, they can make the team better, and I think there's a reasonable chance Jackie Bradley Jr. on the whole is a better value the next 2 years. So, but in terms of fit, it'd be a little weird to trade away their big free agent signing, who had a pretty good year and who has a lot of power. I don't know. I feel like the Indians' outfield is just such a weird situation where like it feels like the weak part of the team, but more because it's three, I guess four really with the platoon and right. It's just a lot of question marks, and no one seems likely to be great. But there's also nothing feels like a huge black hole to me where like you're whatever you add is you're really adding over replacement. I don't know. It would be a weird. It would be to me a weird team trade for the Indians. In terms of the dynamics of like how it comes out, yeah, I think every front office has a reporter or two they know they can get something into the paper with. I don't think that means things get made up. I feel like if they were making things up involving other teams, the other teams would probably push back some.
Oh no, I don't think it was made up at all. I think it was very real. It was just weird that it came out right then.
Yeah. No, like yeah, I think how serious the discussions were, what else was involved, anything like that. Which is why and we've talked about this before. I think the longer you pay close attention to the off season, the harder it is to take much of it seriously because you've seen so many things like this, where there's a little smoke, but certainly not any fire.
And on the the outfield looking weird part. Where was I going with this? It seemed like every episode I forget something. Oh, so Paul Hoynes, he actually had an idea of what the trade could have been, which I think makes a little bit of sense at least, that the Indians, they were reported looking at Lorenzo Cain, and then he went away because the Brewers signed him. So we thought maybe it was something like the Indians doing a three-way trade with the Red Sox and the Brewers. But I guess if it got that far, maybe I would like Domingo Santana more than Jackie Bradley Jr. for Edwin, but that's just all getting into like crazy land talk at that point, I think. So it's not... I mean, like you said, if they could improve the team by trading Edwin, I think they would. I don't think Jackie Bradley Jr. was the alone way to improve the team because the outfield just isn't terrible. Like you said, he isn't a huge upgrade over anybody, which is part of the reason the offseason has been so boring. There's no position that's like, I can't wait to see what the Indians do to improve it. They're all just either great or they're good enough to not really need improved. So
right.
One big reason it's been so boring, but it's also a good reason. It's another reason the Indians have such a great team going into the season. So I guess I'll take that over an exciting offseason.
I agree. And so, I mean, one of the things we were going to talk about is, it's sort of projection season, and Pacoda, which for a lot of people is the big one, came out this week. And we don't need to get into the minutia of player projections, but the standings, surprise, surprise, have the Indians projected to win 97 games, to win the division by 16 games. So, like you were saying, having a team without any glaring weaknesses is a much better problem than a boring offseason.
Yeah, so let's just get into spring training, actually. I was going to do that later, but I'd rather just do it now because I don't really want to talk about you, Darvish, right away. So the Indians, like you said, Pacoda really likes them. We're just a couple days away. Pitchers and catchers on the 14th, position players on the 18th. Right now it's exciting. It won't be soon. What are at least like one or two things you're looking forward to looking at in spring training just with the team in general? There isn't a ton of big position battles, but just kind of what could be interesting to watch for the Indians, trying to make March seem like it's worth anything than just pre-baseball.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a really good answer or a really bad answer. I guess I'm honestly just looking to see what sort of goofing around they do. There was the Yonder Alonso thing, that you wrote up about him pretty successfully pranking some of his teammates at, what was it? Was it Tribe Fest or something else?
Yeah, it was Tribe Fest.
And by standing in line like a fan, and then his teammates not knowing him very well yet. I don't know, because like you said, there aren't really position battles. I mean, to the extent that there are, it's like seventh guy in the bullpen, fifth outfielder. I guess the fifth starter is sort of up in the air. So I guess that's the one we can come back to in a minute and spend a little more time on it. But I don't have a lot of roster curiosity at this point. And again, I think that's fine, but it's another reason I really just want opening day to get here. What about you? What are you looking for?
Well, before we get to that Yonder Alonso video, that was hilarious, but it's also the baseball's marketing kind of issue. I wonder if after Alonso took all the stuff off, I wonder how many people in the stand, or not the stands, but like in line for the autographs realized that was actually Yonder Alonso. I wonder if there's still any. They're like, what is this guy doing with his wig? This random guy.
Yeah,
Because
but
I
I mean,
wouldn't know
Yonder
what he
Alonso.
looked like.
I mean, that's not Mike Trout. I mean,
Right.
who's? I mean, the NBA is great at marketing its stars, but who's the equivalent of Yonder Alonso? And it's like a new eighth man on the roster or something like that. I don't think most fans in any sport recognize a newcomer to the team who's not a star.
Right. Right. And that video was great. And like you, I want to see other kind of screwing around things they do. What is this? They've done like I swear they have some running series they do every spring training. Is it the mean tweets? Maybe that's
Yeah,
the
they
one.
usually have players reading mean social media messages about them. Um, there's some other good ones. The Indians have had pretty good social media for a while, and Joel, who we've had on the podcast, I know he's not in the same position anymore, but I'm sure the social media work will still be pretty strong.
Oh yeah. And so the thing I'm looking forward to, one of them, is I want to see if Jason Kipnis will really be the starting second baseman, which I know is kind of a thing that at this point it's unless he's mysteriously traded like at the last second, he's probably going to be the starting second baseman. But it doesn't seem like the Indians front office is completely locked into the idea. So at the very least, we have some kind of almost intriguing thing going on there. Because Mike Chernoff on ESPN Radio, I couldn't find the whole interview, but who was it? Aaron Goldhammer tweeted that he said Mike Chernoff on Jason Kipnis starting at second base. He just said that's a challenging topic within the tweet, which I mean he's not lying, but if he was fully confident in just the fact that Jason Kipnis would be second baseman, he'd probably just say, yeah, he's our second baseman. There's no reason to leave it even slightly ambiguous, but he kind of did. So I think that's going to at least leave something open because, of course, the idea has always been that Jose Ramirez can go to second, some kind of combination of Diaz and Urshela at third, which we've discussed to death. Neither of them are going to be great at third base, but you just have to either think they'd be better than Jason Kipnis or something. But I think it is interesting that there is at least a tiny bit of chance that the Indians aren't completely committed to Jason Kipnis at second base. Or am I wrong? Do you maybe think that Mike Chernoff saying that it's a challenging topic, is that not really him towing the fence as much as I think it is? Is he just being honest when in reality he's probably going to be the second baseman?
Yeah, I could see it either way. If he's not the starting second baseman, do you think it's more likely to be one of the other non-Ramirez third base options really impresses and pushes their way into the lineup and pushes Kipnis out of the infield? Or do you think it's going to be because the outfield looks like such a mess that it feels like there's more room to keep Kipnis out there?
Well, I think definitely unless there's a trade, the trade is the top one for me, is that the only reason that JC Kipnis wouldn't be the second baseman. But if he is on the team, I don't think the outfield is going to be that much of a mess that they need Jason Kipnis out there. Because at the very least in center, you have Bradley Zimmer, who can not be a mess on defense and can hit well enough, unless there's a ton of injuries. But I don't know anybody in center field who Jason Kipnis is a huge improvement over. And then, of course, Urshela and Yandy Diaz are not great either at third base, so there's not any real reason to bump him out there and then take the huge dip at third. So if he is in the team, I think it will be just because he gets injured or he just is absolutely awful in spring training to take him off second base. But he would have to be so bad that without any other roster change, he's just out of second base, that he'd have to be really bad. I think there's a really big.
I don't think there's any way a healthy
right
Jason Kipnis isn't in the starting line at the beginning of the season. I don't think it's possible for him to play his way out of the lineup.
So this is sort of it's not really the fifth rotation spot, but a sort of way to lead into that. At Patney Hisrick on Twitter, he wanted to know, does Ryan Merritt obviously make any sense in the bullpen? That's the first part of his question there. Which I guess sure. I don't know any pitcher that wouldn't make at least a little bit of sense in the bullpen. He's not like a typical bullpen pitcher, I guess, but sure. I don't think he's going to be in the rotation, and I don't think he has any options left. So it's either the bullpen or he's going to be claimed by somebody.
Yeah, I don't know. Like you said, he doesn't profile as the kind of guy you move from rotation to the bullpen. I feel like someone like Danny Salazar has much more of that profile. Someone who has the stuff that you hope can stick as a starter, but at some point maybe you feel like injuries or ineffectiveness, into the middle innings of the game makes you feel like, no, we should just let him rip it loose for like an inning at a time. Since Merritt, like I said, that's not his profile. It's, seventh, eighth guy in the bullpen could be just about any guy, I guess. And in some cases, I can see you put a guy there just to keep him on the roster. but I wouldn't bet on Merritt in the bullpen.
So let's talk that fifth starter spot then. If it's probably not going to be Merritt, or I guess if you don't think he's going to be in the bullpen, do you think he's going to be that fifth starter spot, or he's going to be gone? Because
I guess I think he's going to be gone. I don't see him winning a spot in the rotation either.
Yeah, because the Indians have, obviously, it's Kluber and Carrasco at the top, which are obvious deadlocks for starters. And then it's kind of Bauer and Salazar probably almost certainly are going to be starters. Well, Bauer, I don't think he's going to move to the pen, but Salazar, like you said, he's one who makes a lot of sense to move to the pen, so maybe. But then there's also Tomlin and Clevinger, and if you want to count Merritt somewhere in that race in the back. So where do you think this is going to go? Because obviously they have the 3, maybe 4, and then the 5 could be anybody. They still like Josh Tomlin, obviously, who's been a starter for, it seems like a million years with the same team now. But is this the year Mike Clevinger maybe comes up and is finally super good for a whole season, or not just half, and gets the walks down a little bit and can still strike everybody out?
Yeah, I mean, whether he's super good or not, I don't know. But I do feel like he's done enough that, I mean, I feel like it's a little tough to sell him not in the rotation as the best possible rotation. I know you have a little more flexibility with him, but I don't think the Indians are in a position where they should really be fussing with the starting rotation for, service time and options and that sort of thing. And I've been a big Tomlin supporter over the years relative to a lot of people. But yeah, to me, Kluber, Carrasco, Bauer, Salazar, Clevinger is what makes the most sense. And to me, Tomlin's best shot is something about Salazar screaming out, it's time for him to be in the bullpen instead. And it's hard to know what that would be during spring training, because if he's healthy, he's in the starting rotation, I think. And the only thing that would make you think that's not going to work is an injury. But if he's injured, then he's on the DL, probably not in the bullpen. And then maybe when he came back from the DL, you'd feel like, all right, let's just move him to the bullpen. Especially, not that they should be using the roster this year to plan for next year, but given that Miller and Allen are both almost certainly gone after this year, Danny Salazar is a potential fantastic back of the bullpen guy, would make a lot of sense for 2019, I think. But I tend to feel like I think Tomlin's the one who gets squeezed.
So the only other minor spring training thing I had will be kind of interesting, I think, is how do Yonder, Alonso, and Edwin Encarnacion split up first base defense? Is it going to be 100% Yonder and almost nothing Edwin? Because I think last year it wasn't quite an even split. It was still a lot of Carlos, but Edwin still got to play first base quite a bit. So I don't know how much that'll be answered in spring training. I'm sure we'll get to see Yonder, Alonso work a lot at first base, and maybe Edwin will not get as much play on the field as he's getting older. So,
I mean, Edwin didn't play that much first base. I feel like he was there.
He played a little bit.
I mean, some, but I think he played like 20, 25 games. I think it was basically like one game a week.
I'm totally not looking it up right now. That is definitely not what I'm doing. Spring training is very interesting.
While you don't look it up, I'll say I expect Alonso to play as much first base as Santana did, and Encarnacion to play about the same amount, which I'm pretty sure means only about one game a week at first base. And when you get done not looking it up,
it's 23 games.
Yeah. So I would expect it to be pretty similar. Alonso's defense, I've read very mixed reports on. My sense is that it's going to be a downgrade from Santana, but that it would still be better than we'd likely get from Encarnacion. I guess part of it is, a lot of players really don't like DHing. Santana didn't want to DH. But I also wonder if some players feel like I'd rather just DH than go back and forth and back and forth. In other words, not that I love DHing, but at least like if that's just my role every time, I can get into a set routine. I feel like there's got to be a lot of players who sometimes playing first place, sometimes not, just becomes more of a distraction. And I don't know where Edwin lands on that, but I would expect a pretty similar timeshare that we saw with Santana, which would mean, Yonder's at first base 5 days a week.
Yeah, if Edwin wants to play first base so bad, I think we have an issue if because he's not a great first baseman when he does play. So I would hope that he's good with once in a while. He hasn't played more than he's never played more than 80 games ever as a first baseman in a season.
Yeah, I mean, he played more first base with Toronto, but yeah, like you said,
but it
at
wasn't much. Yeah.
most he was like a half-time
Yeah.
first base. It's funny, at the beginning of his career, he was a third baseman.
Yeah, with the Reds, he played almost a full season at third base. 2 full seasons. Wow, it wasn't good, but he was there. He was definitely standing there at third base. So yeah, that's spring training. It's exciting for now. It's coming. There's not a whole lot else happening. The only thing that did happen so far is finally somebody signed. It wasn't with the Indians, but it was Yu Darvish of the Cubs. 6 years, $126 million. This is a clear sign, Jason, that the owners are colluding. They're against baseball. Baseball is doomed. Or what do you think of Yu Darvish's contract here to the Cubs? I think he's 31 years old, coming off Tommy John a couple of years ago. So
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's shown that he's pretty well recovered, so I don't think there should be a big Tommy John penalty against him. I think the age is a significant thing. His contract was very mildly lighter than I would have guessed going into the offseason, but not so much so that it feels like, he's really been sold short. If anything, I'm a little surprised he got 6 years. I would have guessed a 5-year deal for a little more per season than he got. Which on the whole isn't that far off from what he did get. It'll be interesting to see how quickly things maybe domino now that one of the big guys signed. At least among the pitching market, it would make sense. I mean, guys are going to be in camp like tomorrow and for some teams. And a lot of guys are already down there. I'm not saying I think there's like, 1985 through 1987 collusion going on. I do think it's a little weird that it's been so different from other off seasons. I know there's a lot of talk about, everyone's got a smart front office now, and they've realized that you don't usually get a great return on those huge contracts. But it's not like there weren't a lot of people who knew that last off season, and last off season nothing has felt like this off season. I think there's something a little weird, and I've read a lot of the big guys are Scott Boras clients, and his clients are more likely to wait. And if just one or two more big guys had signed, it wouldn't seem that weird by now. And I don't know. I like a lot of things, and I feel like this sort of makes me a bad baseball analyst or commentator, or I have a hard time throwing myself fully into either extreme of the debate about it.
Yeah, I think it's like a perfect storm of so many things. Like if it was just at the fact that the Scott Boras clients, that probably wouldn't hold it up so much. If it was just the fact that it's kind of pretty good players but not elite players, that wouldn't hold it up as much. If it wasn't the fact that Bryce Harper and Manny Machado were coming next year, that wouldn't hold it up quite as much. But there's all these things coming at the exact same time. And then plus teams all seemingly learning at the same time about not wanting to pay these over 30 players so much that it's just a really bad start. I think next year when like Bryce Harper gets a $500 million contract, we're going to forget all about it. But just so many things at the same time came together to make the offseason look so bad and so boring at the same time. And also, JD Martinez isn't worth what is like $250,000 that he wants. And Eric Hosmer is not like 8 years, 200 whatever thousand because he has gold gloves or whatever he thinks he's worth. So I think it's just a couple players who way overshot what they thought their value this year, and they're not settling for what they could be making. There was also the fact that Logan Morrison, I think I saw this like late last night, the Indians had offered him, before they signed Alonso, obviously, like 2 years, $20 million, which seems like a lot, but he turned it down. I don't know if he's going to get that at this point, so he might get something, but I don't know if he's going to get as much as he could have got from the Indians, which I'm kind of glad they got Leandro Alonso instead for what they paid for him, so.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think you're right that there's a lot of factors that sort of tie into it. The front office is getting smart is the one that I don't really buy, because there's no reason that suddenly in one off season there would be a significant difference there. But yeah, I mean, I think all of the would-be big players have more red flags than most off seasons big. But it's not just the big guys. I mean, it's the second tier guys. I mean, Carlos Santana signed his deal what feels like 3 years ago to me now. And almost no one in that tier has signed. And I know there's always some amount of waiting for the biggest domino to fall, but I don't know. It's been a strange offseason. I do think the players union has done a pretty terrible job in recent negotiations, and has sort of allowed a pretty bad situation for them to develop, but that's mostly about you know, rookies and guys who haven't even reached arbitration are just staggeringly underpaid. And I know as an Indians fan, a small market fan, like there's some amount of like, oh, well, my team benefits from that, so I guess it's okay. But like realistically, the minimum salary should be way higher, and players I think should be hitting arbitration way faster. And I feel like in the next round of negotiations, which I want to say is after the 2020 season, I think the players union needs to kind of get their act back together.
Well, they're eventually going to have to stop trying to pay themselves, basically, because they're always so focused on getting the veterans paid. It never makes sense for them to cover like rookies. They don't care if, I mean, they don't represent the minors at all, but it's the younger players. They never really care to get more money. It's always they're wanting to get these over 30 guys paid more, but that's not going to happen. The only way they're going to get paid more money is to just bite the bullet and accept the fact that, like you said, arbitration will have to hit sooner. They're going to have to get paid more from the minimum wage. So I don't know how motivated they are to do that necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the problem is they don't have real union leadership. Tony Clark, I mean, that's not his training. You know, Marvin Miller's background was not okay first baseman at the major league level. You don't need Tony Clark, you need Marvin Miller. And I think, you know, they've gotten away from having a real, labor lawyer leadership. I think a lot of the players have focused on things like at least, again, this is just what I read from people who I think would know better than I do, but a lot of, focus on things like who gets to fly in the airplane, and there's a chef in the clubhouse, and they focused on a lot of like fairly minor quality of life things while allowing the owners to win on a lot of the much more significant things. MLB revenues have gone up by like 5 times as much in the last 15, 20 years as player salaries have. Like owners are just getting richer and richer. And most fans are fine with that. Most fans, whether they would think of it this way or not, side with owners in this stuff. And, the players need to do a better job. The owners aren't going to give them more than they have to. And the front offices have figured out these big contracts to guys in their 30s aren't really the best way to win. The players need to figure out a new structure that's going to work better for them.
So David B. Wilkerson in the chat, he asks, any thoughts on Buster Olney's Can the Indians Sustain a Contender piece on ESPN.com? As it turns out, that was one thing we were going to talk about. We kind of added it late because I completely forgot about it. I didn't even think of it as a real thing. It was just kind of one of Buster Olney's, basically his news and notes things like we do on Let's Go Tribe. It was just the main story. But if anybody had a chance to read it, it was from Buster a couple days ago on ESPN, of course. It basically boils down to, without reading the whole thing, Buster Olney contends that the Indians, they're strapped for cash. Their current core will become too much to pay for, and the Indians, they aren't getting attendance to maintain their, I guess not even maintain their payroll, to expand it eventually to be a real contender, as he calls it. He thinks after 2018 they might turn into the Pirates, which was still having a relatively young and intact core, but no way to expand it, so you just have to sell off. He sandwiches it with a weird like tie into the Chief Wahoo going away. I don't get that. He started it with Chief Wahoo's going away, but that shouldn't be the biggest story of the summer, and then he ends it with the same thing, so I didn't get that. But his whole story about the attendance, it's just if he doesn't see the Indians, he doesn't see Cleveland in general saying they can sustain a winner. So do you agree with that, Jason? Is it a terrible point? Can Cleveland? He also brings up the 455 sold out in a row streak the Indians had in the 90s, saying the Indians can't do that again, or Cleveland can't sustain that again, obviously. So what do you think of this Buster Olney's piece?
Yeah, I mean, the 455 is not coming back, but I don't think there's, to the extent that there's a segment of the Indians fans who talk about that, it's a tiny, tiny fraction at this point. I think Cleveland people understand why it's not coming back and understand that it's fine that that's not coming back. I do think it's disappointing that a team as good as the Indians have been the last couple of years can't even crack the top 20 in attendance. That said, attendance last year was up almost 6,000 people from the year before, which is a significant bump. Major league teams have more and more money coming in that's not from ticket sales and merchandise at the stadiums. So it's not. I don't think there's any chance the Dolans are at risk of losing money. If they run out there with $130 million payroll or so. And do I think they could potentially make even more money in another market? Yeah, I think probably they could, at least for the amount of time that they would want to hold on to the team. But I don't think that means there's much chance of the team actually being moved. I don't know. He brings up the attendance, but sort of glosses over the fact that it went way up. I actually, 3 years ago, was sort of concerned about the future of Cleveland hosting a baseball team. But I think them doing as well as they have recently, payroll going up from, I think 80 million at the start of the 2013 season when they made the wild card game to 125 million. I mean, the payroll went up over 50% in a 3 or 4 year span. I don't know. I'm less concerned than I was a few years ago.
Well, I think I could go back if I tried and look at the tapes enough. I'm pretty sure I could find last year where at some point you said, just because the Indians won the World Series, it wouldn't mean attendance and stuff would go up. I'm almost positive you said that at some point. Because I remember specifically holding on to that and thinking every time it went up, oh yeah, Jason, take that, Jason. It did.
I have a hard time believing I would have said it wouldn't have gone up at all. I'm sure I would have said crack the top 10 or anything. Yeah. I'd be happy to track down and be called wrong if I say right now that I wouldn't have said it wouldn't have gone up at all.
And so friend of the podcast, we can call him that now, Joel Hammond, who, like you said, is not he doesn't work for the Indians anymore. So now he just spends his time on Twitter viciously defending the Indians, which is really great. He quoted the Buster Olney post and said the Indians had the highest attendance jump in 2017. They had the highest TV ratings in baseball, which are two kind of big things that Buster Olney glanced over. Like you said it was a big bump. It was the biggest bump in baseball. So they did make a huge jump after winning the World Series. I think it'll be worth seeing, but they should, in theory, have an easy control of the division for the next few years, which is another reason they're not paying so much money. They don't need to right now. They're facing the Twins and half of a White Sox team. They don't need to spend a ton of money to get into the playoffs.
Yeah,
and
I don't think they would, but I think they're pretty close to their ceiling, even if they were in the AL East. I don't think if they were in the AL East, they'd have signed Yu Darvish.
Right. But I mean, they don't have to. If they were in the AL East, they might have had to, and they might fall out of contention.
There's a difference between. I think what I agree with you is the Indians aren't in danger of falling off a cliff after this season, but I don't think. When other teams in this division do eventually get their act together, I don't think we're going to see the Indians operating at a higher level financially than they are right now. I think they're pretty close, inflation aside, I think they're pretty close to what we'll see as their ceiling. And for this year, and I think for 2019, I think that's plenty enough for them to be pretty significant favorites. I mean, the bullpen's going to be drastically different after this year, but they're still, barring injuries, which could happen to any team, they're still going to have a fantastic starting rotation. They're still going to have a really good infield. Other than the bullpen, they're not going to be dramatically different in 2019 than 2018. I could see by 2020 things starting to shift a bit. And I don't know if he means, can the Indians maintain a contender? Does he mean can they be like the Yankees and have a winning record every year for 30 years and, make the playoffs 9 out of every 10 seasons? Then no, I think he's right. They can't. But I don't know why that should be the standard we're expecting from the Indians. If the Indians can have a good 4 or 5 year stretch and then do what they've done a couple times in the last 15 years, which is, go through a down cycle, but it doesn't last that long. To me, that would be a completely successful Cleveland Major League Baseball team.
I do think it'll be interesting to see if they do win, even if it's not the World Series, if they do win a lot this season, what it will do to the payroll. If you're right that they're completely cash strapped, or maybe we haven't seen the highest end of the Indians, the ownership group that they got to add on to, who was already there, because remember their whole reason to come on was supposedly to get the Indians more money. So maybe we just haven't seen the top end of that yet, which would be exciting. So And we won't know for a couple of years. I don't think. I don't think it's completely impossible to think they are at their ceiling no matter what. But I think there is also at least a little bit of chance that they could be willing to pay more when they have to. I think even if they wanted to pay more, they're a smart enough front office where they're not going to until they absolutely have to pay more. Whether that's now or like mid-season when they want somebody who's expensive, like Manny Machado, to get him at the mid-season and take his payroll or whatever, and then I don't know. But I do think there's at least a chance they could pay more money, which is exciting, which is something the Indians haven't had in a long time, which combined with the winning is making it really fun to watch the Indians in baseball right now. And the other thing that Buster only brought up that was weird, excuse me, speaking of the bullpen, was his biggest reason for the attendance might be dropping is that Andrew Miller and Cody Allen are going away in a couple years. Like, that's all he had at the beginning. That and the fact that Francisco Lindor is hitting arbitration, which the Indians can probably still pay. But I don't think losing two, granted, very exciting relievers is going to cost the Indians a ton of attendance, Buster. I don't think that's a thing.
I don't remember him. I don't have it in front of me. I don't remember him saying that the loss of the reliever specifically. But coming back to the attendance and coming back to whatever I may have said about it last year, and like I said, if you track it down, let me know what I did say. Do you expect attendance to go up again this year?
Not a huge jump again, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it like 21st, 22nd overall. Like, the Padres outdrew him last year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him outdrew the Padres.
Overlooking the ranking, because that's dependent on what other teams are doing. So they drew 25,300 fans last year. Do you expect it to be within a few hundred of that, or up by more than half a thousand people, or down by more than half a thousand people?
I don't know about exact numbers, but I would think up, right?
I don't know. I kind of think down.
Do you think the World Series was like a massive part of that boost then? Which makes
sense,
yeah.
I think, so many people, the second the Indians lost the ALDS to the Yankees, were talking about what a failure the season was. I feel like no one, as disappointed as people were, I don't feel like people walked away from losing Game 7 of the World Series feeling like the season was a failure. But I feel like, I don't know about most, but because I don't interact with that many like truly typical Indians fans, because I mostly interact with people who are, on the internet talking about baseball, the team, which is a little different. But I think a huge number of Indians fans view last season as a failure.
Oh, yeah, I think that's fair. I think a lot of them also viewed it as a failure right afterwards, and they might be over it now. I think that happens every single year. I don't know how many fall off based on a failure of a season. I think more get gained by a good season than fall off by a bad season.
Well, yeah,
overall, the Indians still had a good season last year.
I don't think it's going to drop back to what it was 2 years ago. But if I was betting up or down, I would bet on attendance being down this year. And I will try to remember that I said this. So through this season, if attendance is up, feel free to point it out.
So the last thing about Buster, I'm absolutely losing my voice. So I'm going to do this, and then we'll get to an email that we have. But he basically said the Indians' challenge is to maintain a competitive team will grow in the next few years. Their best relievers, Miller and Allen, will be free agents this fall. That was his first big point about how the Indians will struggle to grow in the next few years, which I don't think is true.
But but he's not saying that in terms of attendance. He's just saying in terms of the quality of the team.
But the quality of the team he was linking back to keeping attendance. So I guess it's not directly, but.
Well, but I think that's a legitimate link. I mean, the quality of the team does affect the attendance. I just think the bigger issue than the attendance is how good will the team be. And I think losing the relievers will hurt, but he's arguing that they could be the Pirates after this year. And that I totally disagree with. I still think, again, if everyone's healthy, the Indians are by a significant margin still the best team in 2019. Right? Again, the Twins are projected to be like 16 games worse than them. Miller and Allen are great. They're not 16 wins worth of great, and the Twins aren't getting 16 wins better between this year and next year. Yeah. So I think he's way off base in thinking that this year is. I think this year is the best shot because of those guys in the bullpen. But just in terms of winning the division, I would happily bet right now on the Indians winning the division in 2019 as well.
Oh yeah, how far do you want to take that? I'd say 2019 as well. 2020? That's not. Are we getting into the point where it could be either way between them and like the White Sox? Or are you still pretty confident?
2020, yeah, the White Sox have so much young talent that the Cubs' talent came together so fast. Yeah. Things can happen pretty quickly when you have that kind of talent on the farm. And the White Sox are also a team that. if properly motivated, can outspend the Indians if it comes down to it. Jerry Reinsdorf is not a big spender, but I think under the right circumstances. And yeah, the Twins, in 2 seasons could be a dozen wins better, certainly, and the Indians, could certainly drop off 5 wins to make a difference. So yeah, I think by 2020 you get into, not that I think the Indians are going to be a mess by then, but there's enough possibilities on other teams in the division not for me to feel super confident.
So before my voice box completely collapses, we got a really nice email from Sid Cawthorn, who, by the way, you can always email us. You can either email at matr.lions@gmail.com. That's my email, or sbnletsgotribe@gmail.com. But Sid, he said, "Good afternoon, Matt. First and foremost, I really enjoy the show. I was born and raised in Mississippi and moved to Houston after college, but somehow I have been a diehard Indians fan since I was about 7 years old. I blame it on Kenny Lofton and the fact that they were the best team to play on Triple Play 97, which you talked about in the podcast before. That's why I'm a fan of most things is from video games." He said, "Anyways, I really appreciate all the time you guys put into the podcast and the fun, great articles you write. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Sid. And he had 2 questions for us. The first one, he said, "What do you think about the Indians pursuing Carlos Gonzalez for outfield depth? Do you think it's possible or even a good idea? No one is talking about him, and it would seem he picked up relatively cheap. I read that he was having sleeping problems the last couple seasons and it led to his awful output for the Rockies. Seems to me it could be worth the gamble." So Jason, what do you think? Carlos Gonzalez, I kind of like that one. I wrote about it before about the Indians, who was left basically they could pick over in the outfield. That was kind of one I suggested could be, if they can get him for like a minor league deal or super cheap, then there's no reason not to. He could be a really good 5th outfielder if they need him to, maybe even a starter here and there.
Oh, I'd put him way above that. If you just gave me the option of snapping my fingers and replacing our right field situation with him, I would do that. I think he'll be better than Chisenhall this year, but I also don't think he's going to, as deflated as the market seems to be, in the end, I don't think he's settling for anything like a minor league deal. I think he'll get money. I think he'll either get like a deal pretty similar to Alonso's, or I actually think what's a little more likely is he takes a 1-year deal. But I think he's taking a 1-year deal. He's still getting I think $10 million or so on it. $10
million.
And I don't think that kind of money makes sense because he's not a big enough upgrade. I'd rather, if the Indians do have another $10 million in the budget for this year, I would rather just wait till closer to the deadline, see what feels like a need then, and try to add payroll through a trade.
Yeah. I'm going to go on record as saying I don't think he's going to get $10 million. He's 32 and had a really awful season last season. If it is a sleeping problems, then maybe it's something easy to fix. I think Mike Napoli was another one, right, he slept in like a chamber or whatever for a long time. So
Morales' numbers at the end of last year were fantastic, and I don't think there's any reason to think he's going to do that over the full season. I think his track record is way too good for him to be settling for much less than that. Someone on a 1-year deal, if we could pick the midpoint between a minor league deal and a $10 million deal, I would happily bet on him being closer to $10 million.
So Sid's next question is actually, I think, really interesting. I've never heard it. I'm sure it's been brought up somewhere, but I've never heard it. He said, "My wife is an avid runner and often comments on how poor baseball players' running form can be when running the bases. A better form could decrease their time running to first. Do you think it would benefit the tribe to teach their players better form when running?" So the first part there, is that a thing? Do they have poor form running to first base and does it matter a whole lot, you think?
I don't know. I have a lot of questions about this question. One of which is, when I hear someone referred to as an avid runner, I'm picturing someone who runs like 10Ks and half marathons and things like that, which is a totally different sort of running than, sprinting somewhere between 90 and 360 feet. So one, depending on how his wife is viewing it, I don't even know if she's looking at it through the right lens. She might be. But I don't know. For one thing, on the one hand, I've never thought about it before. And so I'm sure a lot of people have never thought about it before. But I'm hard pressed to think no one who works for a baseball team has never thought about it before. So it feels like one of those things, if there was much there, someone would have done something about it by now. I suspect it's, to the extent that guys could be sprinting somewhat more efficiently, because another difference is, even if she's a sprinter, like sprinting 100 meters in a straight line is not really what baseball players are doing. You're you're running out of the box, you're reading the pitch, you're running with a curve because, unless you're running just straight to first base, you're not stopping when you get somewhere or being able to run straight through it at second or third base. So I feel like there's a lot of reasons to think that, well, like you, I think it's an intriguing question because I've never thought about it before. I guess I'm pretty confident there's probably not actually much there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't, what else was I going to say? I don't know. There was something there. As long as Zimmer isn't diving head first in the first, I don't think I care really how they run. If you could call me not an avid runner, but if you're a long distance runner, can you still kind of tell their form is bad over a sprint, or is that like a completely different thing? I don't really know.
No, I mean, I think someone who runs marathons could recognize poor form in sprinting if they've studied sprinting. And so even if his wife is a long distance runner, she might totally know what she's talking about when she talks about running from sprinting. But again, it feels like, given what we do know, which is that teams don't seem to be, at least that we know of, no one's bringing in Olympic sprinters, it doesn't seem like. Either the amount of time they could save is so incredibly minimal, or the possibility of actually teaching a bunch of grown-ups to change their stride. It could be as simple as it's just like one more thing to think about, and you're not trying to complicate things. Like I said, it's a super neat question that I bet the answer is there's not much to be had there.
If anything, I'm kind of surprised that more people haven't taken up what Ichiro did for so long. Is that bat left-handed and swing and lean into the run? Because he wasn't originally a left-handed hitter. He switched because he could do that. I know everybody can't just switch like Ichiro did, but I'm surprised we don't see more left-handers swinging and leaning into their run like he does. Maybe that's just a thing that's super hard to do, I assume.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's probably super hard to do.
Which is another reason that Ichiro is just freaking amazing. But anyway, thank you, Sid. That was a good question. That was a good couple of questions. I like those. So, Jason, anything else before we talk again next week?
No, like 24 hours of enjoying having seen pictures of people playing catch in Arizona, followed by 6 weeks of let's get on with it.
And the Westminster Dog Show, Jason. Don't forget that one. You can watch that on repeat all month if you want.
I'll wait to catch the highlights from you.
Talk to you later, everybody.